When I first moved into that apartment complex, I was just looking for peace. I had gotten out of a bad breakup, needed space, somewhere quiet, somewhere that felt like a reset. The place wasn't perfect. The carpet smelled faintly of old cigarettes. The lights flickered when I used the microwave, and the walls were thin enough to hear people sneezing 2 doors away. But it was cheap, and it was mine. My apartment was on the ground floor, Unit 3B. It faced a small courtyard that looked out at the opposite row of units. Right across from my living room window was another apartment, 3A, and that's where I first saw him. The first time was harmless. I was unpacking boxes late at night, half watching TV, when I noticed movement across the courtyard. There, in the dim yellow glow of his window, stood a man. Tall, lean, maybe in his 40s. He was just staring out, still as stone. At first I thought he was just lost in thought. Maybe he smoked at night or was just zoning out. But then I realized he was looking directly at me. I tried to shake it off. I shut my blinds and went back to unpacking. The next morning, when I left for work, he was there again, standing at the window, eyes following me as I locked my door. It wasn't a glance. It was a stare. His face was pale, emotionless, the kind of face that doesn't blink, that doesn't even register you as another human being. Days passed, and it kept happening. Every time I looked out my window, morning, afternoon, even past midnight, he was there. Sometimes the light was off and I could only make out his silhouette behind the glass. Other times, he'd pull the curtain slightly aside, just enough for me to see the edge of his face. I told myself I was overreacting. I even joked about it with a friend, saying my neighbor had no life. But deep down, something about it unsettled me. It wasn't just the watching. It was the feeling that he never stopped. Then came the first note. It was a Saturday morning. I opened my door to grab a delivery, and there it was, a small folded paper on the welcome mat. No envelope, no name. Just 5 words written in shaky handwriting, "You look nice in blue." I froze. The night before, I had worn my blue sweater, the one I only wear at home. The one I wore while watching TV with the curtains halfway open. He'd been watching me. That's when the paranoia began. I started keeping the curtains closed. I moved my bed away from the window. Still, I'd feel his presence. Even with the blinds shut, I could sense his eyes. Sometimes at night, I'd hear faint tapping on the glass, slow, rhythmic taps, as if testing to see if I'd respond. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps, outside, right by my window. The blinds were down, but I could see a shadow moving. The shape of a man, tall, thin. Then a whisper. Faint, but I swear I heard it. "Why'd you close them?" I froze in bed, holding my breath. Every muscle in my body locked. After a few minutes, silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I went straight to the building manager. Told him everything. The man across from me, the note, the tapping. He looked confused. "There's no one living across from you," he said. 3A's been empty for months. We're renovating it next month." I laughed at first. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He pulled up the tenant list and showed me. The unit had been vacant since winter. No electricity, no water. That night, I decided to test it myself. I turned off my lights and peeked through the blinds. The window across the courtyard was dark, until it wasn't. A light flickered on, faint, yellow, coming from inside. and there he was, standing by the glass, staring straight at me. I grabbed my phone and took a photo, but the image came out distorted, a blur of light and shadow. I called the police that night. They searched the apartment, broke the lock, and went inside. No one was there. No signs of anyone living inside. But they did find one thing. On the windowsill facing my apartment, a small camera lens. Pointed directly at my window, the officer said it looked like it had been there for a while, maybe months. The unit was dusty, untouched except for that one clean space where the lens sat. I moved out a week later. Even now, years later, I still cover my windows before bed. And sometimes late at night, when the blinds sway just slightly from the breeze, I can't help but think, maybe he's still watching. About a year after I left that first apartment, I told myself I was done with creepy neighbors, done with old buildings and dark courtyards. I found a new place, a high-rise on the edge of the city that looked nothing like the last one. It had clean white walls, a modern lobby with fake plants, and elevators that made soft mechanical sounds instead of moaning like something alive. I thought this place would finally feel safe. My new apartment was number 705 on the 7th floor. It was small but tidy, with a long hallway that opened into a living room and a balcony. I loved how quiet it was up there. The city lights twinkled below. Cars moved like tiny insects. And when I closed the door behind me, it felt like I was sealed off from the entire world. The apartment next door, 706, was empty. The building manager told me during the lease signing that it had been vacant for months because of water damage. The pipes had burst earlier that year, and they were still waiting for repairs. I remember even seeing the maintenance notice taped on the door the day I moved in. At first, it was just me on that stretch of hallway. I'd walk out in the mornings, hear only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft buzz of the exit sign at the end of the corridor. It was peaceful in that sterile, lonely way. About 3 weeks in, the peace started to shift. It was around midnight on a Sunday when I heard something through the wall. I had just turned off the TV and was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when a soft sound broke through the silence, a kind of muffled shuffle. It was faint, like someone dragging fabric across the floor. I froze, listening. The noise came again, slow, deliberate, then stopped completely. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the pipes or the air conditioning. I went back to scrolling, pretending not to notice how my skin prickled with every small creak in the walls. But a few nights later, it returned. This time it wasn't shuffling. It was whispering. The sound came from the same spot, the wall behind my bed, the one that bordered 706. It was too soft to make out words, but it had rhythm, tone. A voice. It rose and fell in a pattern like someone speaking just on the other side. I sat up, heart pounding. I leaned closer, ear almost touching the wall. For a second, the whispers stopped. Then a faint giggle, high-pitched, childlike, echoed from somewhere inside that apartment. I pulled away instantly. There weren't supposed to be kids on that floor. The next morning, I went downstairs and asked the front desk if someone had moved into 706. The clerk checked the system and shook his head. "Still vacant," he said. "Completely sealed until inspection next week." I laughed nervously and said, maybe it was the plumbing. But as I walked back to the elevator, I couldn't shake the way the air felt. Heavier somehow, as if the building itself was listening. The following night, I decided to stay up. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just in my head. I turned off the lights at midnight, left my phone recording on the dresser, and waited in bed, staring at the ceiling. For hours, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. Then, sometime after 2, the sound began again. First came the soft drag across the floor. Scrape, pause, scrape. Then something sharper, like fingernails tapping against drywall. It moved along the wall slowly, traveling from one side to the other until it stopped right behind where my head rested. My pulse thundered in my ears. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice cracking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. There was a long silence. Then faintly someone whispered back. I couldn't understand the words, but it was definitely a whisper. And then came 3 deliberate knocks. 1, 2, 3. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and switched on the light. Nothing. Just the bland beige wall and the framed print I had hung to make the place look less empty. The sound had stopped. I stood there for almost an hour before daring to turn the lights off again. When morning came, I checked the recording. My stomach twisted when I heard it. Around 2:13 a.m., a soft voice could be heard through the static. It was faint but distinct. A woman's voice whispering something that sounded like, "I'm still here." Then a laugh, sharp and dry, followed by 3 dull knocks. I stopped the recording right there. I couldn't listen anymore. Later that day, I went back to the front desk and asked again about 706. The same clerk looked at me, slightly annoyed, and said no one had moved in. I told him about the noise, the voice, even the recording. He said he'd send maintenance up to check. That afternoon, 2 maintenance men came with a ring of keys. I followed them down the hall to 706. The door looked like all the others. Beige paint, metal number plate, keyhole scratched from years of use. One of the men jiggled the handle, then frowned. "That's strange," he muttered. "It's unlocked." He opened the door and the smell hit immediately. Stale, damp, and something else, metallic. The apartment was completely dark. They stepped inside first, flashlights cutting through the shadows. I stood in the doorway, hesitant. The place was empty, but in the corner of the living room, the dust on the floor was disturbed, a faint trail of footprints leading toward the bathroom. They followed the trail, pushed open the bathroom door, and one of the men swore under his breath. The bathtub was full of water, stagnant, black water reflecting the beam of his flashlight. Floating on the surface were wilted petals, roses maybe, and in the drain a clump of hair. They shut off the water line, wrote up a report, and left quickly. I could tell they didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment on, staring at my own door. At around 3 a.m., I heard something slide under it. A faint scrape, paper against tile. I hesitated, then got up slowly. A folded piece of white paper lay on the floor. I picked it up, hard in my throat. It said, "Stop bringing people in. You'll wake them." I dropped it instantly and checked the hallway through the peephole. Empty. Just the same sterile hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. I called the front desk again, but there was no answer. I must have dialed 10 times before giving up. The rest of the night I sat by the window gripping a kitchen knife, waiting for dawn. The next morning I went to the manager's office directly. Before I could speak, he said, "Oh, you're the one from 705. He rubbed his forehead. I heard about last night. The cleaning crew found your note on the floor this morning. My note? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, said something about waking them up. You left it outside 706, right? I told him it wasn't mine, that someone had slid it under my door. He looked confused but didn't argue. We'll recheck the locks, he said. Probably kids messing around. That evening, as the sun set and the hallway lights flickered on, I heard footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, they stopped right outside my door. I didn't move. I waited, barely breathing. The footsteps lingered, then turned and continued toward 706. There was a pause, a click, the sound of a door opening. I looked through the peephole. The door to 706 was slightly ajar, just a sliver of darkness beyond. I whispered to myself not to do it, but I did anyway. I opened my door. The hallway air was cool, heavy. I took one step forward. The door to 706 creaked wider, as if pushed from the inside. The smell from before drifted out, dampness and decay. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it into the apartment. The beam caught something glinting near the floor. Metal. A key ring lying in the dust. Then I saw movement deeper inside, just past the kitchen counter. A shadow shifting. My breath caught. Hello? I said, voice trembling. No answer. I took one step back. The door swung shut, slow and deliberate, until it clicked. I ran back inside and locked my door. The building was silent for the next few nights. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, but then the maintenance report came out. The building management posted a notice in the lobby 2 weeks later. Temporary closure for structural safety inspection. I found out the truth from one of the security guards who'd been there for years. He told me quietly that 706 had a history. Decades ago, a mother and her young daughter lived there. The mother had mental health issues, and one night she drowned her child in the bathtub before taking her own life. The apartment had flooded, and the unit had been sealed off for years before being reopened and remodeled. When the new tenants eventually complained of noises, they'd patch walls, change flooring, but the reports always came back. Whispering, water running, laughter. The guard looked at me and said, "You were the first person to live beside it since the last renovation. Guess some things don't stay buried." That night, as I packed to move out, I went to delete the audio recording I had made. My finger hovered over the file, but curiosity got the better of me. I hit play one last time. It started the same. Faint static, creaking pipes, then silence. At the 2-minute mark, a soft voice whispered, "You shouldn't have opened the door." Then came a child's giggle and the unmistakable sound of water dripping. I deleted the file, unplugged everything, and left before sunrise. Sometimes, even now when I take late-night showers, I swear I can hear faint knocking from the walls. 3 slow knocks. Then, in the hiss of running water, a whisper that sounds almost like a breath against my ear. I'm still here, and every time, I turn off the water and stand there, dripping and trembling, listening to the silence that follows, because I know it isn't empty. When I first moved into that building, I didn't expect to stay long. It was supposed to be temporary. A small, old-fashioned apartment complex on the edge of town. I was between jobs, between relationships, and honestly, between phases of my life. The building itself had character, cracked hallways, peeling paint, the faint smell of old wood and coffee lingering in the stairwell. It wasn't perfect, but it had a strange kind of warmth to it. That warmth, I realized later, came mostly from the woman who lived upstairs. Her name was Mrs. Carver. She must have been in her late 70s, maybe early 80s, tiny, frail, with hair the color of silver wire and a soft, quivering voice that always seemed to carry down the stairs. The first time we met, I was carrying a box out of my car. She appeared at the top of the stairwell like she'd been waiting. "Oh, you must be the new tenant," she said with a smile that made her wrinkles fold like paper. "I'm just above you. Apartment 4B. Welcome, dear." Her friendliness caught me off guard. She held a plate of cookies, warm enough that I could smell the butter and cinnamon. I hadn't even unpacked yet, but that simple gesture made the place feel less lonely. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Carver became familiar. She'd always say hello when I came home from work, always ask if I was eating properly, sleeping enough, staying warm. She reminded me of my grandmother, the kind of person who'd worry about you even if you'd only spoken twice. Sometimes I'd hear her humming softly in the evenings, a tune I didn't recognize, slow, melodic, sad. It would drift through the ceiling like the faint sound of a music box. I used to find it comforting, but there were a few little things that didn't quite make sense. For one, I never saw anyone else visit her. She mentioned once that she had a daughter who lived in another city, but no one ever came by. Not once, and she never let me inside. Every time she'd invite me for tea or cookies, she'd open the door just a few inches, enough to pass the plate through, never more. I figured maybe she was shy or her apartment was messy. Still, something about it was strange. Sometimes when she spoke, there was a faint echo behind her voice. Like she wasn't standing right by the door, but further back, in a large, empty room. I didn't think much of it then, but I should have. One rainy night, around 11 p.m., I was sitting by the window when I heard a soft thump from upstairs, then another. It wasn't the usual creaking of an old building. It sounded heavy, like something falling or someone dragging their feet. I waited, listening. After a few seconds, silence. I considered going up, but it wasn't my business. Maybe she'd dropped something. Then I heard it again. This time closer to the corner of my ceiling, scrape, drag, scrape, and underneath it, that same humming, only slower, lower. It sent a shiver through me. The next morning, I ran into her in the hallway. She looked normal, smiling, holding her small wicker basket like always. I asked if everything was okay and mentioned that I'd heard some noise the night before. Her smile froze for a second. "Oh, just moving a few things around," she said softly. Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "I hope I didn't keep you up." Her tone was kind, but her eyes looked tired. A few days later, I came home from work and found something odd. Outside my door sat a small teacup, floral china with gold trim. Inside it was a single sugar cube. No note, no explanation. When I looked up toward her floor, I thought I saw her curtain move. Just a sliver of pale fabric, quickly closing. That night the humming started again. This time it didn't stop. It went on for hours. Same melody, same slow rhythm. It sounded less like a song and more like a chant. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint knock. 3 slow taps on my ceiling. I froze, staring up. The humming stopped, then softly right above where I was sitting. The next morning, I decided to check on her. I climbed the stairs and knocked on her door. No answer. The hallway smelled faintly sweet, like lavender mixed with something metallic. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I leaned down, listening. The air behind the door felt still. I don't know why, but I crouched and peeked through the keyhole. It was dark inside. Too dark for morning. But after a moment, I saw movement. Someone was standing just a few feet away from the door, still, facing it. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell over. My heart was racing. I didn't know if I'd imagined it. I went downstairs, tried to calm myself. By evening, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe it was just shadows. Maybe I'd been on edge. Then at around 9 p.m., someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Mrs. Carver standing there. Same frail smile, same polite tone. She held out a paper bag. "I made soup," she said. "You look tired." I thanked her, took the bag, and she nodded slowly before turning away. I stood there watching her climb the stairs. She moved slowly, dragging her left foot just slightly. And for the first time I noticed her shadow on the wall didn't match her movement. It moved a second slower. That night, I didn't eat the soup. I left it on the counter. When I woke up the next morning, the paper bag was gone. Not torn, not spilled, just gone. I hadn't thrown it away. I hadn't touched it. The only person with a key to my apartment was the landlord. I went upstairs to ask her about it, but when I reached her floor, my stomach turned. The door to her apartment was open, not fully, just a crack. And taped across it was yellow police tape. A man in a uniform was standing outside writing something on a clipboard. I asked what happened. He looked at me strangely. "You didn't hear? The tenant here passed away. My throat went dry." "When?" "About 3 weeks ago," he said. "Natural causes, they think. We've been clearing out her things. I couldn't process it." I told him that was impossible. I'd just seen her the night before. She'd brought me soup. The officer frowned. "Sir, that can't be. The apartment's been sealed since the first inspection." I felt dizzy. I thanked him and went back downstairs, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone was playing a cruel joke. Maybe I was losing it. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I heard the humming again. Soft, slow, coming from upstairs.